Meet the MC of a local 128-year tradition. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Fox 43 studio. We're focused on the 2004 Gallivan's Ferry Stump, and we're visiting with its MC, Tommy Brittain. Good morning, Tommy.
Good morning, Greg. Glad to be with you.
Thanks so much for coming in. It's so exciting to think we're a little less than a month, just a couple of weeks now from this 2004 Stump, and I think Russell said a couple of weeks ago when she was in, kicking off at 1876. This is 128 years.
It's hard to believe there's something still going on that's that old, isn't it?
It really is.
I tell you, it's exciting for me to be a part of this. It's such a reach back into the old history of South Carolina that it's quite a great experience, and anybody who's ever been will be back. Mm-hmm. And those that live in Horry County, some of the good friends we have that have moved down here from other places, they need to come out and get a taste of old South Carolina history.
Particularly if they've never been to Gallivan's Ferry.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, they've driven through there if they've ever been on Highway 501 coming in from 95 or anywhere else.
That old black water, that spot was so crucial to the independence of Horry County for decades and decades and decades. Quite a historic spot. Of course, the Holiday families had a store there for too many years to remember. It's a beautiful spot. It's a very low country spot, and like I say, with the history that's there, it's a good way to spend a Monday night in the spring. I'll tell you that.
That's exactly right. She said a lot of folks will be arriving during the day, but the official piece, I think she said 6 o'clock, everything officially kicks off, but really a lot of folks will need to be there by 4:30, and of course with that stretch of road up 501, you'll probably want to be there a lot earlier.
Yeah, we're used to a lot of traffic jams and problems around here, but that's one time when you'll see some there. I mean, if you want to hear those great banjo-picking bands and country music and mix and mingle, it's good to get there early. But usually when it gets a little cooler, around 6, the speeches start. So that's kind of the official kickoff, but you'll see people arriving in pretty big numbers, probably around 4 o'clock, 4:30.
This is not your first time as the MC.
No. Now, they tell me, and I think it's true, that I'm the first, and I consider this a great honor, that I'm the first non-holiday relative to be the MC.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Bill Davis was the last one, and he was kin to the holidays. And I think I'm the first non-holiday, which I think it's something that I'm very proud to be.
You know, I think Russell claims you as a holiday.
Well,
so that's
I just love this kind of thing. I mean, this is old-time speeches and politics, and something like you've mentioned is this old, begun tradition tells us in history that General Hampton was the first stump speaker. It's something I'm very proud to be a part of.
Before we kick into the stump, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Are you originally from the area, Tommy?
My daddy is a Methodist preacher, still alive and kicking and doing a great job, if I do say so myself. And we moved to Conway, South Carolina, when I was in the 7th grade. And I went through high school at Conway High School. Buddy Sasser was my football coach. Evelyn Snyder was my English teacher. Doris Hedgepath. And so I think of Conway and Horry County as home because that's when I was in high school. I went to Wofford, which I'm the 3rd generation of my family to go to Wofford. Since then, all my children have gone and graduated from there. Went in the United States Army after law school, and then I moved back to Horry County in 1982. I went to the stump as a teenager in a fascinated way. Then, since I've come back in 1982, probably haven't missed one. So I'm a frequent attendee at the Galvin's Ferry Stump.
Well, now, you mentioned you left Conway, went up to Wofford. You didn't mention that you went up there on a football scholarship, and a lot of folks, of course, leave that out. Actually, I don't know if you knew it, John Jenrette, who was a guest with us last Wednesday and Friday, went to Wofford on a football scholarship. He didn't play football, but I think someone pointed out to me that you had played in, am I correct, the Shrine Bowl?
Yes, let me tell you, I think I've got an interesting story there. I was really not a good enough athlete to play in the Shrine Bowl. One of the assistant coaches that year was Buddy Sasser, who was my high school football coach. As they were choosing the players, they didn't really have but one center in the state. And Coach Sasser said, well, you know, Brittain is not big and not very fast, but I think he can fill this role. So I went up for the Shrine Bowl, and that was the first year we had integration in South Carolina. And our head coach, Willie Varner, brought me over and said, Brittain, you're a Methodist preacher's son, aren't you? I said, yes, sir. Said, you're a Democrat, aren't you? I said, yes, sir. He said, I'm going to put you in a room with some of these black fellas. He said, we're going to mix up the whites and the blacks a little bit, and it won't bother you a bit. I said, absolutely not. I'd be happy to. And I had Jim Rice, who ended up playing for the Boston Red Sox, and Freddie Solomon were my roommates. And Freddie was a great football player, too. In fact, he was the star of the Shrine Bowl. But the truth of the matter is, Greg, I did play, and I actually played in the Shrine Bowl, but I was the weakest on the team, I will tell you that. I did play at Wofford. Here again, I was one of those guys with a lot of heart and a little bit of talent. That's kind of the way it went.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
You know, so many folks talk about their experiences in college, and obviously athletics plays such a big role, even in small schools. I went to a tiny school in North Carolina, where you think about the impact that athletics have on schools, and it really stands out in people's minds.
It's very important. I'm on the board of trustees at Wofford, and you know, we have taken a very little bit in the way of money and joined the Southern Conference from an athletic standpoint, and actually won the Southern Conference championship in football this year. What that does for our school is so important. In a small school with 1,000 students, it helps us with diversity. We get our football team get along great with each other. There are no racial issues. They are teammates, and the athletes make up such a large percentage of our school population that we feel like we are really creating a good situation socially and athletically for our students by having an active and successful athletic program. It's very much an important part of the college atmosphere, I think. Small college or large college.
Tom, I was excited to hear you say a few minutes ago you seem to be really proud of the fact that your father's a Methodist preacher.
I am.
You step back, and of course we often hear, and folks talk about it all the time, and I'm not a preacher's kid, and so I just hear about it stereotypically that the preacher's kids tend to be the wild childs. I mean, the kids who really stand out, who have lots of problems. Is that true to fact, and if so, why do you think?
I think that there's a lot of pressure on a preacher's child. At least it used to be. Your teachers would expect you to handle things a little differently than the average child, and most people are going to rebel against that kind of thing a little bit. Now, I was pretty successful in keeping my dalliances away from my father's attention, thank goodness. But I'll tell you in all sincerity, the tough part about being a preacher's son, you got to follow like I do. You know, you can never ever live up to the sort of moral conduct that man is living, and though I believe so strongly in Jesus Christ, I'm a Christian, but I'm not the man my father is. I can't walk the straight and narrow like he does. And it certainly made it easy for me to decide that I was not cut out to be a Methodist minister. Now, my sister is a Methodist minister, and my sister Jan preaches to thousands of people at the time. She's a very successful Methodist minister. But so she didn't fall into that normal path that you're talking about. I'm much more the typical preacher's child than she was.
Right.
I don't know that Jan's ever made a mistake. If she did, we never did. I never did figure it out or see it. But I think there's a little something to the pressure associated with being a preacher's child.
Tommy, so just you and Jan? Y'all are the two?
Sure is. And Jan's a little bit young. Jan's about 4 years younger than I am. When we moved from Conway, she was about halfway through her high school days. She's made a marvelous preach. A lot of people here in Horry County and in your viewing area have heard Jan preach. She comes down here from time to time and preaches revivals and things. And I know it sounds like I'm bragging about my family. I guess I am, but she's really made quite a preacher. She certainly has.
The fact that your father was a preacher, did that have any influence on his grandchildren? I mean, has that had any influence on you and your wife's kids? Or on
I know you're not supposed to say this in an interview, but that's a great question.
Oh yeah, give it up.
Let me say we've got 3. 2 of them are in law school.
Is that right?
One of them I wanted so desperately to be a preacher, and he agreed to take a year off after he graduated from Wofford and consider it, which he did very faithfully to me. And at the end of that year, he said, "You know, Daddy, I just don't have a calling there. I want to go to law school," which he has done. And he and my daughter are up there together now, going to law school. And my father's been the best about it. He said, "Now, son, you can't. That's one thing you can't engineer. If a man or woman is called to preach, it's going to happen. And if they aren't, they need to be doing something else." I think my father always knew I really wasn't cut out for it. He never encouraged me to do that. I loved Perry Mason as a child, which was kind of strange, even at a very young age. And somehow I got fascinated with the law early on, so I always was telling everybody I wanted to be a lawyer. And it just kind of ended up being that way. I never really considered the ministry as a viable option for me.
Tommy, the legal profession's such a big deal, and to think so many students finish college, 21, 22, and then go straight into law school and are out of law school at age 25. When I mean, you know, and have that opportunity to go out and begin representing folks. It is. I mean, and your children may be examples of that. I mean, and yourself, example of that, going straight out of college. Are you too young to begin practicing law at 25? I mean, it just seems like such a young age. I mean, and my father's a law professor, and all of my family are attorneys, but I can't imagine. It just seems so young. It's such a big deal.
Well, he would tell you, you know, the old system that we only have remnants of now was much better, where young lawyers were almost mentored to a senior lawyer. And it took a lot of seasoning, a lot of second chair participation before you know, somebody was out there on their own making some tough decisions. Now, unfortunately, our system, like all of our systems, the legal system is so overwhelmed with numbers that there is a learning curve that people have to get on pretty quick. Now, law school is doing a much better job, in my opinion, of shaping these minds. You know, what it does is it gives all of those that are responsible for the administration of justice, it puts them on the same intellectual playing field. Every law school in the country teaches the same type of material. Your father is a professor. If he was dealing with civil procedure, his class would be very similar to the one taught at the University of South Carolina. And what that does is that allows a lawyer in California and a lawyer in North Carolina to know how a case should be and can be resolved between two citizens of those two states because they've been trained in the same fashion. So I think these young lawyers are much more prepared than we might would think. Now, you know, our system requires a good bit of experience before you can handle like a capital case.
Right.
Those sorts of things.
Right.
But hey, it's a system that's got humans in it, so mistakes. You know, I always say the first 6 months you're trying cases, you're just making mistakes right and left. And you don't even know it. You know, the next 6 months you're making mistakes right and left, but you realize you're making mistakes. when you get to be good at it is when you see the mistakes coming and you can avoid them.
Right.
And that takes a good bit of courtroom experience to get to that point.
I was really excited to see after finishing law school, obviously you had a commitment to the Army and went in there, and so you became, is it a JAG attorney? Is that, or you trying courts martial and, or getting into that, excuse me, working with, we obviously the focus on the stump, but we just real quick about that, what's that like, the military system versus the civil and criminal system in America?
There are a lot of similarities. I think that gave me the best piece of experience I could have gotten, because I tried probably 100 court-martials when I was at Fort Hood, Texas, 1st Cavalry Division, for about 4 years. And all sorts of types of offense. We had a large base with like 70 or 80,000 soldiers there. And they have a jury system. It's made up of officers generally. And here's the way I would compare it. They require more, in my opinion, in the way of proof out of a prosecutor. They really take to heart, these officers do, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, they're tougher. If you lose, the penalties are harder. I think it's just the nature of the military. But I think you can get as fair or a fairer trial before a court-martial. I've got a court-martial I'm getting ready to do at Camp Lejeune on May the 7th. Involves a young man down here, a very fine young Marine that was originally charged here with felony DUI. And the Marines took over the jurisdiction of the case. And I'm going up to Lejeune to handle that court-martial. And so I think the experience you gain there is tremendous. It certainly carries over into the regular civilian administration of justice.
You've handled some high-profile cases, and obviously, as you said before we started this morning, a lot of folks we've only got about 10 minutes, and so I sure want to focus on the stump. But
sure.
It talked to you about when folks think of Tommy Brittain, they think of the Senator Bud Long, the defense of Kenneth Register, and so many other cases. But of course, you went into you came back to Conway in '82 and worked for a little while there. In '84, I think joined a firm in Myrtle, and then of course teamed up with a couple of good friends and formed your own firm 15 years ago, Tommy.
Right. It's hard to believe.
That is. That's a big deal. What's that like, building your own practice? Of course, getting, as you said, some of that practical experience at Fort Hood, then back in Conway, and now having your own practice with quite a few other folks.
I think compatibility with your law partners is very much like compatibility with your wife. I mean, if you, and the three of us, George, Hearn, Morgan Martin, and I, there hasn't been a crossword between us in 15 years.
Wow.
I mean, that's how good of friends these two men have been to me, and business partners. And that certainly makes building a business easy. But it's like everything else, hard work, paying attention to your responsibilities, and living in an area like your viewing area where there's so much business activity, so many people moving in. I think it makes building a law practice much easier than it would be in some of the outlying areas that don't have, an economic engine turning over and over like ours is. But I've been very fortunate to have hooked up with those two men.
Let's go ahead and segue into, you mentioned Wade Hampton.
Yeah.
And 1876, and you said, as history talks about, or as you've heard, talk a little bit about, obviously you weren't there in 1876, but you've heard a lot about it, and then really, how did it get started? The great historian of South Carolina, in my opinion, is David Duncan Wallace. He was a Wofford professor. And if you go back and look carefully, you'll see that campaign of 1876 was a turning point in South Carolina history. It was basically the end of the Reconstruction period and the beginning of the agrarian period. No question that Hampton came, no question that he spoke at the stump. Exactly where he spoke, there is some question about. Some of the historians say he spoke closer down into the Conway area. But no matter what happened, that began a process here of political discussion that teamed up with the agrarian aspect of Horry County. Farmer, politician. And
Of course, the Holiday family turned this into a major political event. And for it to have gone on in a continuous fashion for this long, there are very few things in our state that have this kind of history to them. You know, you can imagine those of you viewers who are familiar with the PD and its history, we can assume that the nefarious Edmund Bigham was there, probably spoke at the stump. All of the great politicians from this area. We had a very colorful state senator named Kemper that was quite a character, and he sort of ruled supreme at the stump there in the late 1920s, right up through before World War II. So what I like to try to do, Greg, is we got a lot of folks that live in Myrtle Beach that, of course, I've become friends with that are from Pennsylvania and from New York. They're the ones that need to come and see this. They really need to feel that, because it's a throwback to the old day. You know, in this day of, like you and I sitting here on television, and I watch this show, and I was telling you earlier what a frequent viewer I am of this show. And many people will see this. Many more people will see this, and they'll see that stump. So the stump is archaic in that way. You know, it's an old-time way of politics, but it's got a texture to it. There's an event there, and I just hope we don't ever lose that. I really hope we keep it. That is something worth preserving, and that's why I'm excited about being part of it.
We got 5 minutes, and that excitement, being out there, of course, you haven't been out there as a teenager before going off to Wofford, and then since '82, it's been continuous for you. These are Democrats speaking, right. A lot of Republicans in the crowd. It is a concert of bringing everyone together. And what is it that's so exciting? If we were trying to encourage the folks in Pennsylvania or New York or somewhere else, or someone in the PD or in southeastern North Carolina to come down, travel 501, you'll know when you get there.
Well, I'll tell you, this is, when you're there, a couple of things can happen. Number one, some of the great men and women of Horry County may take you off under a shade tree, and you get to talk to them a little bit. I know Luke Benson, who was one of the great men of Horry County. He's dead now, passed on. Associated with the Conway National Bank for years. I had been gone. I was back in '83 or '84. He and I got off under a thunderstorm. We got stuck up under a shed over there, just he and I. I had 45 wonderful minutes of instruction, advice, and so there are those sort of unusual meetings and conversations that you have. You see the characters of Horry County, the Jim Dunns, the Ralph Wilsons, the Holiday family, all that's important. The second thing is, when you're there listening to the speeches, the good ones and the bad ones, the short ones and the long ones, you can't help but get a feeling that the men that founded this country had something like that in mind. They had some sort of public speaking, exchange of views in mind to give a life's blood to our system. Those are the two main reasons I think to go. The relationships, the friendships, and the conversations, and feeling like you're a part of the way things were meant to be from the very start.
It's like live theater.
That's right.
It's like going to a movie theater, actually going to sit in the Florence Little Theater or the downtown Conway, being there and experiencing that. And there is a lot of theater involved, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. I think there is. And, you know, you talk about Republicans being out there, that the Democratic Party's been on good times, bad times, good times, bad times. But that's the tradition, is that the Republicans don't get to speak there. Right. But they work the crowd. They accomplish a very good bit for themselves at the stump. It's an all-around political event, really.
On Friday the 7th, you'll be at Lejeune putting together a heck of a lot of work. On the weekend, you'll be taking off that attorney's cap and instead putting on the MC's cap. How will you wind down and get ready, and also know that you're not having to get up there and give a stump speech, but you got to get those guys, men and women, pumped up about being there?
Well, and that will be, you know, doing what I do for a living, the stump will just be a relaxing, fun time for me. It's a little hectic trying to get the schedule done, but the holidays do most of that. I generally show up and try to have an encouraging word in between and a fairly short introduction. We try to move it along. That's kind of my job to do that. But what I'll have to do too is I got to leave there that night. I have my board meeting at Wofford the next day, so I do have a busy little stretch there. Even for me, I'm used to taking life at a much gentler pace, and I'll have that weekend.
What's that like? 3 kids in law school, 2 soon to possibly be 3. How's that for you and your wife experiencing that now?
It's I tell you, I'm extremely excited about it. I guess I'm like everybody else. I hate to talk about it. I am so proud of my children. You know, I guess everybody's proud of their children. It's a hard task to succeed in law school. They really do try to do some weeding out there. So to the extent mine are up there plugging away, learning, and making the grade and achieving, and both of them doing very well, Kathy and I are just busting with pride, to be honest about it.
Tommy, thanks for being with us this morning.
I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Tommy Brittain coming up next. He had to have a call-in to be a Methodist minister. His sister got that call-in instead. You heard him talk about his devotion to God, his clear devotion to family, and his devotion to hard work. Those are simple words, but they mean a heck of a lot, and they go a long way. He's touched a lot of folks' lives. You can catch him on Monday, May 10th, as he kicks off emceeing a non-holiday family member who's been accepted by the holidays, and they're excited to have him, and we're excited to see him. Monday, May 10th, Galvin's Ferry, the 128 years of the Stump, 2004. Get out there.